Each and every person on this pitiful planet is vastly different from one another, and yet each and every one of us will die. When you think about it, it's kind of hysterical. Our entire species is plummeting through an unsolvable existential crisis over what the point to life even is, while all of it will always end regardless for potentially nothing. There's an infinite amount of possibilities that people use to fill that void. Spirituality, happiness maximization, nihilism, and while the list will go on, I long ago discovered what keeps me sane in a world that at some point in time won't even remember that I existed, no matter how good of a candidate I am for history's most perfect man. I laugh at people who shuffled off this mortal coil in spectacularly amusing ways, and I know a good number of you out there do the same. Welcome aboard, sailor. This is part 5 of my series covering the list of unusual deaths from Wikipedia. This is a relatively exciting entry because we have finally reached the 19th century, which for a lot of historical texts denotes the late modern era, and that's very important because now we'll be talking about entries who have much more accurate records detailing their passing, as well as potentially video and film evidence capturing the moment of their demise firsthand. Look, if you're a sick fuck like I am and you want to cross-reference some of these specimens with their related live leak links, be my guest, because now we're at a dawning of time where that's possible, and we'll be covering some familiar faces you may have already heard of. I've never been more excited to potentially disrespect someone who has grandchildren that are still alive today. Let's go! Go straight over to my Flexi Spot desk, that is. This is my Flexi Spot desk, which is a motorized standing desk. Now you might be asking, why do I need a standing desk? Well, it's not just me who needs one. You and everyone else on this planet needs one. I would wager even some smart dogs need one. And that's because we spend far too much time sitting down. As a ground pound proud patriot of the Stars and Stripes in the land of the 36.2 obesity percentage rating, I know what it's like to be a lazy fuck. A standing desk is a great way to add more mobility to your day-to-day life. I'm a 6'4" behemoth, crushing all things in my path and bonking all door frames in my way. So when I want to record myself shredding on my guitar, I don't want to sit down and cram myself into a chair to try to play and then maybe stand up and bend over to try to use the computer and record and up and down. That snaps my back in half and it's really uncomfortable. Let me show you just how simple it is to use the Flexi Spot desk for my ultimate guitar recording setup. Now I can shred with the best of them! This is a keyboard I haven't plugged into anything that's going to be used to simulate my computer setup. And this is a tall, cold glass of fresh Florida orange juice that I got specifically to piss off everyone else in the other 49 states. Now, you most likely won't be able to drink this as fresh from the tap as I can, but you can have a desk that's just as stable at full standing height like the Flexi Spot desk. Look at that. Look at that juice. It's not moving at all. Max height and the sweet citrus nectar doesn't even come close to spilling. That's the power of Flexi Spot. Flexi Spot provides all kinds of standing desks and ergonomic chairs to meet your demands. If you want a premium standing desk for daily use, you can check out their E7 Pro C-Frame. If you're afraid of global inflation like I am, you can choose the E2 model for only $150 and you can get the basic standing function. And you can use my promo code YTB15 for 10% off of your order of over $500. That's code YTB15 for 10% off of any order over $500. Flexi Spot. Put whatever you want on top of it, but it'll never taste as good as pure Florida orange juice. Imagine it's 1814 and your life sucks. Well, okay, I guess you only have to imagine the 1814 part. But since it's the early 1800s, you're just on the cusp of the societal working force rallying for more leisure time and less strenuous working conditions. But you're not quite there yet. Which means one of the few pleasures you have in life after a long day of working at the factory that somehow makes other smaller factories is drinking a nice cold glass of beer. And like all good things, it's only good in moderation. With the severe consequences of overindulging in alcohol well known to us now, it'd be grossly unhealthy to consume gallons of the stuff in one sitting, wouldn't it? Well, what if you were forced to do just that? And I don't mean 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 gallons, I mean potentially as much as 388,000 gallons. Okay, the Europeans didn't find that shocking, so 1,470,000 liters. The London beer flood was just such an occurrence, and it happened on October 17, 1814. The Horseshoe Brewery, which was just a regular brewery and wasn't a bar for horses, which I found was very disappointing to learn, was a quaint little beer makery that had a 22-foot-high wooden fermentation tank. And this thing was equal to about the drinking capacity of a fourth of a college fraternity, because it held about 3,500 barrels of porter ale inside its delicious bubbling gut for fermentation purposes. At around 5 p.m. on the day of the world's coolest tsunami, George Crick, the clerk of the brewery whose name makes it sound like he's a very small, meager man in an animated movie whose character arc is that he finally learns to stand up to Ebenezer Scrooge, heard a startling noise and noticed that one of the 700-pound iron bands holding the vat together had slipped off. Now, the thing about fermentation is, if you do it wrong, things can explode. And I think a 700-pound solid piece of metal rupturing off a 22-foot-tall tank is a pretty good indicator of you better get the fuck out of here. But no one cared, because this happened pretty regularly. Crick knew that the bands had slipped off a few times a year, and they just had to be reapplied. He nonchalantly left a note for his superiors to have the bands reapplied later, and informed his supervisor, who told him, and this is a direct quote, "No harm whatsoever will ensue." 8 people die in this story. I mean, come on, this series is called Weird Deaths, not silly little blunders where nothing happens and this happens all the time. Just an hour after that initial alcohol spasm, things certainly got a bit fucky-wucky. The entire tank ruptured, spewing hot, steamy drunk juice all over the place, and catapulting enough shit around with enough force to destroy the brewery's back wall. Did you really think that's all that exploded? Explosions beget more explosions. That's the first rule of explosions, with the second being that cool guys don't look at them. Several other vats inside the brewery got caught in the chaos and blew the fuck up, and hence we have a 388,000 gallon tidal wave ready to get London plastered whether it wants to be or not. A 15-foot wave of beer powerful enough to impress even the Bud Knight started surfing through London, and not only did it kill people, but it destroyed 2 entire houses. 8 different people were reported to be annihilated by this incident, including 4 people attending an Irish wake at the time. God summoning a giant tidal wave of party juice to kill people at a party being thrown for a person from a nationality that's known for drinking is one of the funniest bits of irony I've ever seen. Big props to whatever eternal creator you believe in, because this shit's just too wacky to think it's all a coincidence sometimes. Shockingly enough, everyone working in the brewery at the time came out okay, with 3 of the workers having to be pulled out of waist-high water to avoid drowning. And speaking of drowning, this wave was so perfectly bodacious that it instantly flooded people's cellars nearby, which led to a large amount of them having to climb on furniture to avoid the drowning and stuff. Once the giggle drink had subsided, the alcohol proved that it really is a drink intended for adults only, because of the 8 people killed, 7 of them were either elderly or children. I once again have more credibility for my thesis of old people suck and children are stupid, but that's an entirely different video. And it's potentially not even the end of the story. Since there was a brand new flood of free beer floating around, people showed their true, altruistic nature and did what any person would do in a horrid disaster that cost people their lives and homes. They did everything they could to violently make sure that they profited from it as much as possible. People began filling buckets and other containers with as much free booze as they could. Some took to leaning down and drinking it up on the spot, which led to a rumor that potentially a ninth person died in all this carnage from alcohol poisoning. Now, while we do have extensive records of the 8 people killed in the tsunami, such as a mother and daughter who were literally swept out of their home like a door on an airplane being opened, there doesn't seem to be a name attached to that potential ninth victim. But with how quick people some are to wallow their life away at the bottom of a glass, I'm gonna assume there were potentially dozens more fatalities from ingestion that we just didn't document. The mourners who died at the wake were also given their own wake at a community center, and unfortunately hysterical irony stops there because as far as I can tell, the wake went off just fine and nothing happened. After a long inquisition, it was ruled that the entire thing was a freak accident and the brewery was spared any liability. But in having to fix up their nuclear testing center, the brewery and its vats, the owners petitioned Parliament to give them some bailout money to save them from bankruptcy. When asked about the financial proceedings, Mr. Young, one of the partners of the brewery, was quoted to say, Yeah, people died, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Hurry the fuck up and get this thing open so I can go back to making money. Now, you remember how I said George Crick's character arc was to stand up to Scrooge? Well, there you go. To whichever major motion picture studio steals this $100,000 movie idea, you're welcome, and I'll see you in court. On the plus side, this incident directly inspired breweries to switch from wooden fermentation tanks to concrete ones, and the brewery itself was demolished a year later. And it also made at least one person in London with common sense say, oh, shit, wait. Beer tastes like shit and getting drunk is a waste of my life. I think I'll use my love of alcohol to exploit people for profit instead of killing my liver with it. And that man's name was Captain Morgan. Okay, so this next entry is probably just clickbait. I don't understand why it's on the list. It's a really common one and it's not that strange. Let me just read it verbatim here. I got it written down on my screen. Okay. Governor Morris died from an infection after using a whalebone to clear a blockage in his urinary tract. Again, I don't get this. Like, I think my research found that roughly 21% of all men died last year from whalebone-related penis trauma, and my great-uncle died of that, and okay, except my great-uncle, I think he was using like a swordfish's like nose because he said, and I quote, he liked the way it scratched real good. Okay, you might think I'm fucking with you. Fine. This entry on the list came with a footnote calling it dubious, along with a link to the discussion page for the entire article. The handy-dandy Wikipedia contributor of this article noted, was this really unusual? What was the common practice to clear a blockage of the urinary tract at the time? And this was posted all the way back in December of 2021. Fine, I'll do it. I'll be the one to verify whether or not dying of an infection from a piece of a seafaring mammal skeleton in your piss hole was actually unusual, because I have to do fucking everything around here. And I'm glad I did, because I nearly pissed myself when I saw just how much historical data we have on the history of urinary tract infections. We get downright encyclopediatric with this stuff. Okay, so this is only mostly related, but it's a fun little side note. Now, common knowledge is that women are far more likely to get UTIs than men. And in 1849, there was a book released entitled The Female's Medical Guide and Married Women's Advisor. It described a condition that's very similar to a urinary tract infection known as the whites. And no, I'm not talking about who ruined hip-hop. Its symptoms include vaginal discharge, lower back pain, loss of appetite, pale complexion, low spirit, and smarting while making water, which is just about the funniest thing I've read all week, and I love my fucking job. Whether you believe that phrase to mean pain while urinating or being an absolute know-it-all while running your kitchen sink is entirely up to you. Personally, I like both options. Regardless, I did find a ton of 1800s treatments for UTIs. We have injecting natural remedies into your genitals, herbal compressions, opiate enemas, bleeding from leeches, and all sorts of other really stupid ideas. But as for full-on blockages of your urethra, here's where things get pretty enlightening for those uneducated on the magical world of moving things in and out of your dick hole. In the documented evidence of this event, the term whalebone is often used, but it may very likely be an incorrect translation. When they say whalebone, they may actually refer to whale baleen, those bristle-like hair things on the inside of a whale's mouth. And that is a very, very important difference, especially when talking about dick holes. First of all, look at the two side by side. Whalebone it's a bone. You know, the spooky, scary skeleton shit. Nothing at all about that is practical for jamming into a one-way out orifice. But whale baleen is kind of like a really, really, really long bristle on a brush. It's flexible and pliable and it gets in there real good. And do you want to guess what baleen bears a really strong resemblance to? A bougie dilator, which in simple terms is a flexible probe or wand most commonly used to explore, clean, or dilate passages in the body. Now these days they're all made out of medical grade plastic, but back in the times before that, they were made out of whale baleen. And they're often used for cleaning material buildup out of the urethra. I don't know why I'm pointing at my screen. I probably can't show that. I'm gonna put like cute kittens back here or something, but it's good fucking news. Because this death was not unusual. Because this man was using the exact thing people would use in this day and age to try to clear a bladder infection. The only possibly unusual thing about this death is that he did it to himself and died from infection rather than getting a doctor or brave volunteer to do it for him. But if you haven't pissed for days because you've got jagged calcium deposits in your pee-pee place, I think you're gonna get a little desperate. Oh god, I feel really fucking good about that one. I'm not even gonna lie. I usually just like share stuff that I find through Google while making you laugh, but I genuinely did some research and made a historical difference here today. Wikipedia. Feel free to take that one off the list and add another footnote that says Huggbees does it again. All right, this one's just fucking stupid, but it's chuckle-worthy, so it's going in the video. William Snyder was a plump little 13-year-old boy who was hanging out near a performing circus troupe in San Francisco, trying to sell candy and peanuts. Also, quick side note, I have the newspaper clippings from this incident and I'll put them on the screen now. For some reason, the papers refer to him as William Bernard, but all the documentary, article, and historical sources I found, including Wikipedia, call him William Snyder, so I'm gonna stick with that. Anyway, Manuel Reyes was one of the clowns performing that day, and he was often described by others as being mentally defective. Either this guy was no flattering genius, or he was the real-life Joker fresh from Arkham Asylum. For no reason, and I really mean no reason, Reyes decided he really wanted to fuck up William Snyder's day. Reyes grabbed William by the ankles and spun him around like a fucking Olympic hammer throw. By the time the silly spin stopped, William was bleeding from the mouth and unresponsive. He was taken to a hospital where he died, and the coroner ruled that the spin had ruptured his pulmonary artery. Now, Manuel was arrested and the court ruled the death to be an accident, which... What? Fucking what? He grabbed the kid by his ankles and rotated him like a fucking baked potato. How is that an accident? Even if the hype of the circus made him get a little crazy, that's gotta at least be manslaughter, right? It's not just whoopsie fucking oopsie, you killed a child. Amazing. Mission complete. That right there is why you're the best, boss. And so everyone went about their day and no one cared, and William's parents were interviewed a week later and they both collectively glanced at each other and said, "William who? You mean the Bernard kid?" That is until 2 years later, when Reyes was arrested for committing assault and battery on a police officer. During the court case for that charge, it was noted that Reyes commenced slapping his face as if a swarm of mosquitoes were pestering him. He also was noted to continually whisper to himself in gibberish. Again, real-life Joker. Call the Batman. Okay, wait, this is like the 1800s? Okay, yeah, call the Batman. We've done 1800s Batman before, that's a thing. And this is when something truly zany happened that would make clowns everywhere proud. The officer who brought the charges against Reyes said that he recognized him as the guy who killed William Snyder, and also the guy who killed someone else before that. According to newspaper clippings at the time, Reyes was given a sentence of insanity and was sent to an insane asylum in Stockton. They more bluntly called him a lunatic in the news article, which just reminds me how dull and watered down our language is today. And that's the story about the crazy clown who killed a child. And I did it all without a single reference to Stephen King's It, because I'm far more original than anyone else on this platform, and I don't need to rely on lackluster paint-by-numbers references like all the other creators that you like watching, except for the fact that I referenced the Joker. And not once, but twice. I'm a fucking fraud, man. Matilda of Austria, also known as Archduchess Matilda Marie Adegunde Alexandra of Austria, also known as John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, which coincidentally is my name too, was destined to be the old-school Queen of Italy. But her death at the age of 18 will kick off a wonderful societal debate in the comments section, because when you hear this story, I need you to ask yourself an important question. Is this story yet another instance of a teenager doing another stupid teenager thing? Or does the 18 years of age qualify her as a legal adult, meaning she just so happened to be a really stupid functional member of society? Matilda wanted to go to the theater to watch Twilight Zero, Breadsticks and Vampires, so she put on a comfy gauze dress and stepped outside her royal palace. She was an archduchess, so she was a bigwig, fancy, important type person. Keep that in mind. While outside, the fresh air made her cover her mouth and gag before she quickly lit a cigarette in panic. Then she took a big huff of it and said, "Ah, that's better, because tobacco users are fucking morons." Her dad, Archduke Albert, Duke of Teschen, decided to go outside for some fresh air because fresh air is good, and no, you can't substitute it with 10 straight hours of League of Legends, you fucking sewer cretins. As he stepped outside, Matilda immediately hid her cigarette behind her dress. Since her father forbade her from smoking because Archduke Albert smart, Matilda dumb. You see, old school Victorian dresses were kinda just fucking death traps when it came to open flame. There's a million and one reasons they could easily cook you like a pompous, overly important goose, including flammable materials, trapped air pockets, and the abundant use of clunky crinolines, which burn just like everything else. Well, Matilda erupted alright, and light up like a wealth inequality Christmas tree she did. Attendants to the royal family tried super duper hard to do anything, but by the time she was put out, her neck, her back, her pussy, and her crack all had third-degree burns, and she died about 2 weeks later from her injuries. There's a pretty solid article from Medium that details just how common dying from your prom dress exploding into Ignis was in the 1800s. I'm gonna link that in the description while I thank my lucky stars that as a manly man, I've been able to wear this same fucking thing for the last 200 years. The fact I'm immune to fire thanks to my status as an immortal god warrior is just icing on the cake. Clement Vallandigham was a lawyer who was so good, he could make Phoenix Wright, Johnny Cochran, and Atticus Finch all discuss their case against him to prove him to be an incompetent lawyer, and then proceed to drop it. Now I know there's 1.5 million Better Call Saul memes floating around the internet, but we all need to drop them in favor of Clement Vallandigham, because this motherfucker provided the most effective defense argument in the history of American legal proceedings. But let me tell you the whole story, and I'm also just gonna call him Clement because his last name's really annoying. On Christmas Eve, Thomas Myers was playing a card game with some fine folks in a saloon when a group of 5 thugs burst in and started a fight, as thugs are known to do. There was all sorts of disorder and chaos, and in the commotion, Myers pulled out his pistol, fired it wildly in the air, and then slumped over dead. It turns out he had already been shot before he had even drawn out his weapon. Eyewitness accounts were all pulled together, confirming that there was a single gunshot before Myers himself pulled out his pistol and began rattling it off everywhere. And the police arrived at a prime suspect who had shot Mr. Myers, a Mr. Tom McGahan. It made a lot of sense to finger him in the crime, as it was widely known that the two Toms were constantly fighting and pissing each other off. Maybe during the scuffle, McGahan took the opportunity to blast a hole in Myers' chest. So now we get to the trial, and through consultation and deliberation and all those fancy legal words, Clement comes to believe that McGahan did not shoot Myers. Clement proposes a new theory. In the ensuing scuffle around the card game, Thomas Myers actually shot himself by accident while trying to draw his weapon. As one of the trial days came to a close, Clement realized that if you fired a pistol at point-blank range, it would leave gunpowder residue on the target, which was found on Myers' body. Clement himself was a highly proficient gun aficionado. He took some cloth from the hotel he was staying at and conducted ballistic tests on it with his own handgun. And upon seeing residue left on the cloth from firing the gun at point-blank range, he knew this gave credibility to the fact that McGahan was innocent because he couldn't have shot Myers that close during the multi-man brawl. Once the test was finished, Clement packed up and went to his hotel room, so giddy over his discovery that he bragged about it to patrons in the hotel lobby. Eventually, he received a package from another expert shooter, the local postman. Inside the box was the unloaded pistol that belonged to the victim, Thomas Myers. It was delivered to Clement so he could study the evidence for the next days of the trial. Clement went to his hotel room and placed the guns on his table, thinking of how to properly present his test results in court for maximum effect. Eventually, noticing how similar the defendant's gun and his own gun were, he settled on a demonstration to prove McGahan's innocence, remembering that he had experience with these weapons. The next day in court, Clement rambled on and on about how amazing his gun was. He mentioned how the feeding ramp was polished to a mere sheen, how the slide had been replaced with a reinforced version that meshed perfectly with the frame, about how the frame itself had been iron welded and scraped down for maximum precision alongside the front strap being checkered to prevent slipping. And of course, he brought up the original 3-dot sight system with enlarged front sight and the ring hammer replacing a regular hammer for cocking control and speed. Clement mentioned the removed grip safety, the extended thumb safety, the slide stop, the whittled down trigger guard, the long type trigger, lighter trigger pull, widened magazine well, magazine catch button, flat mainspring housing, cocking serrations, and the fact that it could easily shoot a one hole at 25 yards in a machine rest. But most importantly, he mentioned how similar it was to the defendant's gun, which meant he had experience with both weapons and could competently demonstrate what happened during the shootout. I'm gonna reenact what happened next exactly, including saying exactly what Clement said during the moment that this all happened. Clement tucked his gun into his pocket, then quickly drew it back out while leaving it pointed at his stomach. Then he yelled, "There! That's the way Myers held it! My God, I've shot myself!" He shot himself in the stomach in the exact same way that Myers did. So it turns out, Clement thought he put the unloaded evidence gun into his pocket, but he put his own gun in his pocket, which still had 3 rounds in it from when he performed his ballistic tests the day before. For 12 hours, doctors and surgeons tried desperately to remove the bullet, but couldn't do it. The next day, Clement died of inflammation. His last words were that he always had faith in that good old Presbyterian doctrine and predestination, which is a pretty high and mighty way of saying, yeah, I was gonna shoot myself eventually, whatever. So why does this guy deserve all the glory for being the world's best lawyer? Well, it's because Thomas McGahan was acquitted. Clement successfully, and I mean really thoroughly and successfully, proved that the victim absolutely could have died by accidentally shooting himself through a live demonstration. And that success lasted for about 4 years until Tom McGahan got involved in another saloon shootout and died. But then it turns out another hotshot lawyer said that he could prove Tom McGahan accidentally shot himself, and he performed ballistic tests and... No, I'm kidding. The story just kind of ends here. Sorry. Henry Taylor was a simple man. He loved being alive, and he loved carrying coffins holding the corpses of people he knew. Life was good for Harry. Until one day, while acting as pallbearer at yet another funeral that he loved so very much, Henry tripped on a stone and was crushed to death by the coffin. You remember how I mentioned earlier that this era is cool because we finally get well-documented sources? Well, this was written about in the Saturday, November 2nd, 1872 issue of the Illustrated Police News, which was an old-timey newspaper that acted like the original Live Leak. No, I'm serious. It was a newspaper that found they could achieve higher sales by illustrating all the most dramatic and intense stories. It basically amounted to them printing nothing but murders, hangings, and accidental deaths in full glorious grayscale comics. And once again, I have more evidence that proves nothing ever changes in society, and people will always respond to the most pulpy garbage you can muster in the most convenient package. The greatest confusion was created among the mourners who witnessed the accident, and the widow of the person about to be buried nearly went into hysterics, which you can read into two different ways. One, the widow saw an accident at her husband's funeral and went absolutely wacky with stress over the whole thing. Or two, and this is my personal favorite interpretation, the widow was feeling pretty blue all about her husband dying, but then after he committed one last murder from beyond the grave, she doubled over in laughter. Because let's be honest, this shit's pretty funny. Do you eat your vegetables? Well, you better, because you want to grow up big and strong, don't you? You want to make sure you're tough enough to survive when the vegetables try to eat you back. Sir William Payne Galway was an English politician who was just 2 days from retirement when he went on a hunting trip. He tripped and fell on a turnip and died. As he bled out from every orifice after the trip and his former partner in the politics game held his hand, Payne Galway muttered with his dying breath, "Damn it, I was only 2 days from retirement." Now this next person, we don't know who he is, but we do know what he did, or rather what he had done to him, and for that we can be thankful he's dead. In 1888, the Ottoman Empire reported in multiple different documents that in a village in Suleimania, Iraq, a meteorite fell from space and killed a man. This is the first time that this has ever happened in human history. Ever. Yeah, ever. We've had tons of people die from the consequences of meteorites, such as shockwaves, exploded debris, and structural collapse, as well as cases of dubious accounts or things that appeared to be meteorites but were something else. We've got 1,000,001 incidents on record of meteorites fucking the earth up by flattening tree lines and causing craters and injuries out the wazoo, but as far as we know, this is the only ever documented case of God pitching a fastball from the atmosphere and beating some dude clear across the park with it in a manner that would terminate his privilege to live. The only other direct impact we have on record wouldn't happen all the way until 1954. Ann Hodges was an Alabama woman, that's America, Alabama, in case you were confused, who had a 9-pound space stone slam dunk its way into her hip by bolting through her ceiling. And she lived! She suffered major bruising by being clobbered by a 4.5 billion year old rock, but otherwise was fine, and the stone ended up being donated to the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. But she didn't die, and also that's like 70 years in the future from what we're talking about, so we're getting way ahead of ourselves. The 1900s and people who survived don't belong in this video. They belong in my upcoming Women Who Have Some Kooky Association with Space video. We're here to talk about a dude whose name we don't even know because he got cowabunged by an interstellar assassination attempt. Oh, it turns out I kind of just said everything there was to say. The meteorite also paralyzed another dude, and it was such big news that the governor of Suleimania reported it directly to Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Look, this story was actually only covered through historical record digging back in 2020, so we're all treating it the way that we treat every moderately impressive historical breakthrough in the modern era. We completely ignore it, shrug our shoulders, and go back to figuring out which my thing good, your thing bad meme most appropriately fits the current year. Bridget Driscoll was a 44-year-old mother in 1896 who did what any good mother would do back then. She forced her kids to go to church and lived a perpetually miserable life. On her way with her kids to an event held by the local temperance organization, probably called something like Stare at a Blank Wall and Feel Bad About Everything You've Ever Done, Bridget was hit by a car and killed. Did you react? Did you even care? You really should have. Connect the dots here, guys. Bridget Driscoll was the first human being ever hit and killed by a car. She was absolutely clobbered by this car, traveling an astonishing 4 miles per hour. But it potentially could have gone as fast as 8 miles an hour. What a pussy. The car that hit Bridget was a special car being demoed in Britain to represent the Anglo-French Motor Carriage Company's new German imports. It literally couldn't go faster than 8 miles an hour if it wanted to, but for the sake of demonstration it was limited to 4. 3 people were riding in the car at the time of the accident, and the driver was a Mr. Arthur James Edsall, who we should all point and laugh at because he should reign in history as the forever king of Britain's worst drivers. Edsall didn't know his ass from a clutch, or his brakes from that bitch. because he ran that woman the fuck over with his car. Okay, I am exaggerating a bit. He actually knocked into her going about 4 miles an hour, which caused her to spill into the road, hit her head, and die. Now, you're probably thinking two things. One, holy shit, she died in only a 4-mile-an-hour crash? Wow, cars really are the most dangerous thing in the world. I should probably stop texting and driving for 5 fucking minutes so I can refrain from being a selfish bastard for a single moment in time. But then you probably paused, took a deep breath, meditated, and thought, how did she get hit by the car if it was only going 4 miles an hour? Well, according to testimony from Bridget's daughter, Arthur Edsall didn't know fuck all about driving. He swerved and jerked the car all over the place, only being able to cry, "Stand back!" and ring the car's bell over and over again to try to hope that Driscoll actually could get out of the way. At which point he swerved into her and gave her a KO worthy of Street Fighter 6. Now, no one particularly cared about this happening, since people die every day and empathy is for the weak. But the event was so strange and new that an investigation into Driscoll's death was called for by the royal court. People rambled in testimonies about what the heck happened, including commentary from domestic servant Florence Ashmore, who said the car traveled at a tremendous pace, in fact, like a fire engine. Normally, I'd put a reminder joke here that the car could only top out at 8 miles per hour, but I think it'd be even funnier to mention that all I want to do is wrangle up everyone involved in this story, put them in a time machine, and have them watch a modern Formula 1 race so I can weigh how much the shit collects in their pants. And yes, I'm going to include the corpse of Miss Driscoll in that. Everyone knows you shit yourself when you die. After everything was said and done, and probably like 40 different tea times were called, a verdict was reached that the death was accidental, and the coroner of the entire thing said, and this is a direct quote, "I hope such a thing would never happen again." This is a really relatable experience. Raise your hand. Who of you out there has been stabbed, but for one reason or another, you didn't realize it? For me, it's because of my impossibly impressive muscular physique, hundreds of hours of rigorous mental fortitude exercises, and of course the fact that when I was locked in time prison, I spent 10 million years breaking and resetting my bones until I eventually stopped feeling pain and evolved instantaneous healing. There's reasons my tough, strong, and not as handsome as me, but still handsome audience might be in that group. But for you ladies out there, particularly time travelers from 1898, tell me if this sounds familiar. Empress Elizabeth of Austria was, well, that. And she was out for a lovely walk with her best gal pal and lady-in-waiting. Oh god, okay. Countess Irma Zistere de Zistara it Nagim Mihaili. Yeah, her. While talking about getting Irma a name change to save everyone a huge fucking hassle, a man walked the opposite direction to them and bumped into the Empress. He continued walking and even giggled a bit as he walked away while muttering, "I did it, holy shit, I did it. Because Empress Elizabeth was just stabbed by the Italian anarchist Luigi Lucchini, whose name sounds like it might be Luigi's canonical legal name if his last name wasn't already Mario. The stab wound pierced through Elizabeth's heart and one of her lungs, but she carried on like nothing happened. In fact, she kinda just shrugged and said, "Oh, pardon me, sir," when it happened because she didn't even know that she'd been stabbed. She walked a whole football field worth of steps before she finally collapsed, floated in and out of consciousness, and died. And all of that was because of her extremely tight corset. You remember how earlier I mentioned wearing women's fashions in the 1800s was a really great way to get yourself killed? Well, this is yet another example. It's just kind of in the opposite direction. Due to the really thin blade used by the assassin, Elizabeth's wounds were really narrow. Her tight corset caused blood to pool in her heart at a very slow rate, which meant she didn't know something was wrong until it was too late. If she hadn't been wearing her corset, she very likely would have immediately known something was wrong, either by feeling that she had been stabbed, or blood that would leak onto her clothes from the wound that her companions could then notice if it wasn't held in by a full-body strangle machine. Here, I made a flex. Stop what you're doing. Stop getting distracted. Pay the fuck attention, class. I made a flex tape meme to illustrate what happened using a meme generator. Now, I'm well aware that I'm not technically using the meme properly at all, but I don't care because my creation serves two very important purposes. Number one, it much more cleverly uses the leaking liquid visuals to demonstrate what the hell happened. And number two, I'm doing this under 5 layers of irony to point out the sad fact that I can make this really interesting historical content as digestible and entertaining as possible, and yet some people out there just won't give it a chance without me ticking the boxes that fill their immediate dopamine response check marks. Now, would Elizabeth have survived if she had noticed her injuries sooner? Maybe. But what about the anarchist Mama Luigi? Is anarchist really a profession? Shouldn't this guy be called, like, shoemaker but also kingslayer? Or, yeah, he was the local postman who really just fucking hated the government? Well, Luigi offered a quote on that after he was arrested and faced trial. "I am an anarchist by conviction. I came to Geneva to kill a sovereign, with object of giving an example to those who suffer and those who do nothing to improve their social position. It did not matter to me who the sovereign was whom I should kill. It was not a woman I struck, but an empress. It was a crown that I had in view." This dude didn't even care who the fuck he stabbed, as long as they were important. That's badass. And I think his punishment should have been to, in the ultimate irony, become the king of every nation on Earth. Because then you can figure out who his next target would be. And finally, Felix Faure, which I'm going to assume is how you say it in English because online pronunciation guides for his name were all over the place. Let's keep this one simple. Felix Faure was the president of France in the late 19th century, and he Bill Clinton'd himself to death. While at the Élysée Palace, which is literally France's version of the White House, Felix suffered an ill-timed stroke and died. Now, I suppose if you think about it, any strokes are ill-timed, but this one happened to be when he was hanging out with his mistress, Miss Marguerite Steinhall. Oh boy, that's a pretty embarrassing situation to get caught in. I mean, having to explain to your dead lover's wife why you were the last person alone with him when he died, and he was the president of all people. I mean, oh boy, what a wacky time to be alive. Oh, and did I say they were hanging out? I should have clarified. They were in the middle of fucking. Felix was balls deep in his illicit love affair when his brain blood started exploding. Balls deep is a euphemism, by the way, because the actual sex act is still under debate. But most commonly, it was reported that he was getting a blowjob. Hence, he Bill Clinton'd himself to death. During the commotion, Marguerite started screaming, and Felix's hand got tangled up in her hair. That's when the president's aides ran in and, thinking quickly, clumsily began hacking and chopping away at Marguerite's hair so haphazardly that they cut into her skull. The entire incident was covered up until it wasn't, and news spread around everywhere telling everyone about the extra spicy affair, which then led to perhaps the sickest burn of the entire 19th century. Now, for this to be really, really funny, you gotta speak French, and that's just silly to assume anyone would ever do that, because I don't speak French, so I'm just gonna give you the context first. In terms of ancient Greece, everyone knows that Caesar was the title applied to the head honcho of the Roman Empire, but you may not be familiar with Pompey, who was a Roman general that played a very significant role in Rome's growth from republic to empire. And finally, pomper, which sounds a lot like Pompey, is a French verb meaning to suck out, and is routinely used as a euphemism for oral sex. Some of you might have put the pieces together, but keep all that in mind. Rewind the video like 8 or 9 times so you can memorize all that. Get ready. Political commentator George Clemenceau, at the time, said, "He thought he was Caesar, but he died as Pompey." Damn. Holy shit. All right. If you really didn't follow it, I'm going to make this applicable for people who speak English, which I'm going to assume is the people watching my videos. Imagine if President Joe Biden died the same way in office. So he had a mistress and he was getting his dick sucked and he had an aneurysm. And someone commented, "You know, I thought he might want Obama as Secretary of State, but now I can see he prefers Bush." Well, join me next time in my fantastic Haha, You're Dead series, where things really are gonna fire the hell up next time. We are finally hitting the 20th century, and that means that entries on this list are going to skyrocket thanks to advances in historical record keeping and globalization. No, seriously, every decade from the 1960s to today has its own entire dedicated section on the list. So we're never, ever gonna run out out of content ever again. At least we most likely won't. I mean, I suppose people could just stop dying one day, but I don't think that's gonna happen. It's like saying one day I won't be funny.